I'm Jessica, and I wear the bracelet because I believe that HIV needs to be destigmatized. Now I pass the ribbon on to Matthew.
I wear the bracelet because I believe in spreading awareness and fighting against HIV and AIDS, and that no matter what, everyone deserves to be protected and cared for. And I pass the ribbon to Lena.
I wear the ribbon because before this internship, I didn't know how deeply HIV and AIDS impacted communities all over the world. We have so much work to do in erasing the stigma and helping to support these communities with the treatment and resources they need. I pass the ribbon to Kate.
I wear the bracelet because it shows my friends, family, and community that I love, respect, and support them. And I pass the ribbon to Alan.
I wear the bracelet to support the many people that have been diagnosed with HIV and to spread awareness to my friends and family. I would like to pass the ribbon to Madison.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, I'm Madison, and I wear the bracelet in honor of the uncle I never got to meet who died of HIV/AIDS in 1988, and in honor of the millions of people around the world who are HIV positive who fight every day. This is an ongoing epidemic, and it deserves our acknowledgement and our efforts to help. This is a great time for us to come together in unity and create change. So now I pass this ribbon on to you. Why do you wear the bracelet?
Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to Richard Skipper Celebrates. Today, we're going to take a moment to pause and to commemorate World AIDS Day, which is actually tomorrow. This show came about because of my dear friend, Ellen Matzer. A month ago, she reached out to me and asked how I was going to be commemorating tomorrow. And tomorrow's show was already in the planning stages. But thank God she reached out to me and she brought me to my senses to do a show today. And every guest that's on the show today has personally been touched by AIDS and HIV. And I'd like to begin by telling my story. I came to New York in 1979. I grew up on a tobacco farm in South Carolina. I had never been outside the environs of my hometown. And believe it or not, this may come as a surprise to many, but I did not even know that I was a gay man. I had never been with anyone. I had never been on a date, either with a male or a female. I was all about the theater. And so when I came to New York and I came to the realization of who I was already in New York for a few years. And by the time that I began to acknowledge who I was and to live my authentic self, we were already reading in the paper about a gay cancer. And you can only imagine that for this young man, myself, that it was a very frightening time to go through. I lost a few friends. I remember the memorials. I remember going around to the hospitals and singing with Hearts and Voices and everything that we did as a community to come together to celebrate our brothers and sisters who were living with this dreadful disease. Today, we're going to take a moment to pause and celebrate some very special people. Last week, I had Madonna Cacciatore on my show, and Madonna was telling me about her brother. And I asked if she would come on today, and she said yes. So, Madonna, I want to thank you, first of all, for being here. And I'd like you to begin by telling us about your brother and about how you first began to hear about AIDS and HIV at the same time that the rest of us were learning about this.
Thank you, Richard. And you know, I adore you. I love, I'm honored that you asked me to be on the show with all the other wonderful guests. My brother Johnny lived in New York City. He moved there in the mid-1970s and lived in Hell's Kitchen. And, I came out first and, oh, there we are. as little kids. He was always like this with me. He was my protector, you know. So Johnny was about 6 years older than me, and I would go to New York often after he moved there, and he would teach me how to walk in the street and how to get a taxi, and, you know, all the street wisdom that I learned from him. For as far as HIV and AIDS, he was diagnosed in 1987. But prior to that, but I didn't know it at the time. And prior to that, we were learning what you said. We were learning about a gay cancer, and then it was called SIDS or something.
Right.
Yeah, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We have two nurses on the show today who will correct us on everything.
Thank you. So. Yes, because that just seems so strange after, you know, everything we've gone through, to have sort of these iterations of how AIDS developed. But we learned about one of the first people. So I was in New York a lot, and then I moved to DC, and then eventually to New York with him. But in the mid 80s, there was a circle of people we were always with. We were having holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, hanging out, having great food. And one of the first people, a guy named Dennis, my brother told me, Dennis has AIDS. And I thought, oh my God, you know, and then there was still so much unknown about the transmission of it. And so people were being very fearful. And of course, our government wasn't being very helpful either. So that's how I sort of first learned about it. And then Johnny came out after I did, which was much earlier than the AIDS epidemic. And he told me he was in love at this point in time. And I said, oh, who is she? And he said, it's Jimmy. And I said, oh, cool. And so Jimmy, you know, then Jimmy got AIDS after Dennis. So I knew Jimmy very well because he and my brother were in a relationship for quite a while. They had split up before that, but then my brother met his forever partner, Tommy, who is still alive, but and never really got HIV. But they were together for 9 years. So that's when I started learning about it, when this circle of friends started getting sick, and it was bad at that time. It was not just, you know, there were no drugs. People were just wasting, and, you know, all the bad things that were happening during that time. And so we were going to memorials a lot.
The video that I opened with today, I was so thrilled to see all these young kids. None of them were around when we were all going through this time frame. And I remember ACT UP starting up in New York, and the activism that our community really came to the forefront. And thank God that because no one would even discuss it. And thank God for Elizabeth Taylor, because Elizabeth Taylor, being a friend of Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, got Nancy's ear and eventually got her to talk. There's a great documentary about Rock Hudson. And sadly enough, when Rock Hudson was in Paris, have you seen the documentary?
No, I have not.
When Rock Hudson was in Paris, no airline wanted to transport him back to the United States to get the treatment that he needed. And so Elizabeth Taylor paid for a private jet for him to be able to fly home and get the treatment that he needed. Because there was so much that we didn't know about that. For those who are a little bit younger, who have no grasp of what that time frame was in our lives, can you describe a little bit about what was going on, not only in the world, but within our own community?
Well, for me, it was really, we were all living in the moment. I feel we were all just trying to take care of each other. It was coming at us more quickly than we could even imagine. And we would, you know, go to a memorial and then somebody else would be diagnosed and go to another, and not knowing how long anybody had. And these were young men mostly. People were not, they shouldn't have been dying. And so I remember, this was a different Jimmy Carr. My brother surrounded himself with dancers. His partner now, who I'm still, is like my brother, Tom Lemansky, works for New York City Ballet, but he was a dancer with Elliott Feld for many years. So my brother was around a lot of dancers. And the first person I was really super impacted by was a dancer named Jimmy Carr, who was with Jose Limon Dance Company. And he was one of the first people I went to the hospital to see. I think it was called St. Clair's Hospital in New York.
Right.
And I remember going into his room, and we didn't care if we didn't have masks or whatever. We just went in. We just needed to see Jimmy's bright smile. And he was in this ginormous room that was probably the size of my house, but he was isolated. But he had it beautifully decorated. I just remember he put up pictures, and he had, his spiritual sort of altar, and we just went in and thought, what's happening right now? I don't understand what's happening. It was so fast, and there were so many unknowns, and how can this many people be dying in front of us? And it wasn't the dying was hard enough. It was seeing them suffering before they died, and how could we help them? And the one thing that stands out for me is how generous people were with each other, how kind we were with each other. There was nothing else that mattered except taking care of each other. And I hate that that's how it happened, but I loved that is what happened as a result, because all these organizations like God's Love We Deliver and all those wonderful organizations that helped my brother and Tommy. Tommy was on tour quite a bit during some of this. So they both needed help, and they would come in and take care of the cats and bring the medications and bring them food. And, for me, understanding living in that was horrible, but it was also a gift of humanity, which I'm missing terribly right now.
Well, I want to bring on two angels of humanity, and that's Ellen Matzer and Valerie Hughes, because they have this book, Nurses on the Inside. I interviewed them both when the book first came out, and getting to know them over the last few years has been a real gift to me. And Ellen, they were right there in the midst of all this, and they were both working at St. Clair's. So Ellen, Valerie, thank you for being here. And you can decide who will go first.
Well,
after you.
After me. So yes, Valerie and I met in 1978 and 1979 in the ICU of Roosevelt Hospital. We started to see the first cases of what we now call AIDS, only we did not know it at the time. We were perplexed. And since back then there were no cell phones, social media stuff, felt like we were working in a bubble. So we were seeing young men who at the time we did not know were gay, were coming in, having had a perhaps 2-week illness when they went to their primary physician, and they said, go home and rest it out. It's a cold. And then before you know it, they were coming into the emergency room, being unable to breathe and being placed on a ventilator, where they shortly died thereafter. So this is 79, 80, 81. And it wasn't until 1985, Val had done some other things, and I also went back to working in a different ICU where AIDS patients were shunned, or people we thought had AIDS were shunned. We were wearing double gowns, double gloves, except for me, honestly. I actually had to leave that job because of the severe isolation restrictions. It was at that time that I saw an advertisement in the New York Times for St. Clair's Hospital opening up the first designated AIDS center in New York City. And I said, that's where I need to be. And I joined there the latter part of 1985 and opened up several units. Val joined after that, a little bit after that, and we worked together there for approximately 5 years. So we probably were there when your brother or friends were there. And we were there for the opening when Mother Teresa brought 3 inmates down from Ossining Prison, and Archbishop O'Connor accompanied her there to furlough these patients. Following that, we both went to Lenox Hill, where we ran the AIDS Center program there in different capacities. I was inpatient, Valerie was outpatient, and decades later, we kind of wrote the book almost on a dare. A friend of mine just said, please, you got to write about this. And we said, you know, who wants to hear this? I mean, we just did our jobs. And then we decided to write the book, and we're very pleased with it. And it's gotten a fair amount of traction because it does tell the real events of what happened, depicting patients and their course of illness, the patients that we became very close to and remember to this day. And I know Valerie will comment too, but you know, between us, we have over 4 decades in nursing, or I should say 8. We each are nurses for over 40 years and have taken care of thousands and thousands of patients. And the ones that I remember are those that passed from AIDS. And I will always remember them. And now they are memorialized in the book. And the one that I wanted to say,
I want to let everybody know that no names are mentioned in the book. The characters, the people that are depicted in the book have been given fictional names to protect their memory and who they were. You know, it's very interesting because in the early 80s, I had a very bad, severe reaction to fish. And when the ambulance, and I passed out on the subway platform at 42nd Street. And because they guessed that I was a gay man, they took me to St. Clair's Hospital. And so even though I, thank God, did not have HIV or AIDS, that's where I went, and I spent 7 days at that hospital. So I know the hospital very well. Valerie, I want to get to you for a moment, and thanks for being here again as well. Both of you, I want to say thank you for everybody for the work that you did. And, you know, moving on in life, you know, some people may want to put that part of their lives behind them, but both of you, having never written a book before, created this incredible book. What was the big takeaway for you after going back and revisiting everything that you had actually lived through so many years before?
Well, for me, at the time we wrote the book, I was doing HIV research and have done that since 1999. And clinical research is very different than, it's not like I was hanging out with test tubes and labs or anything. What that means, I was working with people. And we were trying the specific therapeutics or preventative measures that have come to be used now. We were testing them. And so when we decided to write the book, I thought, oh my God, we've come so far. We have come so far. And it allowed me to look at my current work and say, sometimes it seems redundant and boring, but God, how important it was. I mean, when I started working in research, we basically had a handful of drugs, and the handful of drugs had so many side effects, and it was 22 pills 3 times a day. And, you know, by the time we wrote the book, there were 3 and on the cusp of 4 therapeutics that were 1 pill once a day with a lot fewer side effects. So I have to say that I'm very happy that in my work. And so I was able to look back and say that the things that I've accomplished made me feel like I was definitely part of the solution. And, you know, I'm a child of the 60s and I have to be part of the solution. And so, it was really very instructive for me. And the other thing is that I realized that so many people don't remember what happened. And you know what happens when people don't remember? They allow it to just go back to be the way it was, and that's a real shocking issue. So, just to give you a couple of statistics in the United States, there were approximately 36,000 new cases in the United States, in 2022, and that was down by 17%. That's a huge decrease. It's a very, very big decrease. So our words about prevention, transmission, and therapeutics have not fallen on deaf ears. And I'm very happy about that, because one of our goals has been to help end AIDS, and it's a very, very important thing. So, and I think it may actually be happening. Worldwide, things are maybe not so great. In 2022, there were 39 million people over the globe who were living with HIV. And for the first time in 2022, over 50% of people living with HIV were female, women and girls. And so that's a slight skew. In the United States, it definitely skews male. And so I think that it's very important to do what the theme of World AIDS Day is, which is to let communities lead. This year, it's let communities lead, let people figure out how to work best in their own communities. Don't make policy decisions without the community being present and active in it. And recognizing that not ending AIDS is more expensive than ending it. So those are some of the takeaways from World AIDS Day that I just want to voice.
Well, thank
you so
you
much for the opportunity to come on your show. I'm so pleased that you invited me.
Well, I'm glad that Ellen made the suggestion. So, Ellen, I want to bring on my dear friend, Michael Colby. Michael has been on the show before. He is a writer himself. He's written many musicals. He has a book called The Algonquin Kid. He grew up in the Algonquin Hotel. And he's still growing up. So I'm thrilled that you're here, Michael. You also, when I reached out to you, I asked if you personally had been touched by anyone that you knew who had passed away from AIDS. And there were a couple of people that you wanted to acknowledge today. So thanks for being here.
Well, it was an overwhelmingly grim time in the 80s, mid 80s, when it seemed to be everywhere in the theatrical community. And three of my closest colleagues were lost. It was just, the drama of this strange illness taking over and the consequences. There was so much brilliance and budding talent that never reached beyond that. The three I was closest, but actually beyond the theatrical community, I also was touched because one of my childhood best friends was the brother of Elizabeth Glaser. Oh. And that was a shock to me too. And I remember having sleepover dates with Peter Meyer, and there was Betsy Meyer, the beautiful cheerleader, and nobody could have anticipated that she'd contract AIDS through a blood transfusion in the hospital while giving birth. So the loss in so many respects, it just can't, sometimes it feels indescribable. The three people I was closest to, I wrote a show called Charlotte's Suite, which was my breakthrough musical. And my leading man was this wonderful talent named Christopher Seppi, who was the longest running boy in the Fantastics. No, that's another one. My director was Edward Stone, who was probably one of the most ingenious and funniest collaborators I ever had. He was like the brother I always wanted to have in the arts. And when we were in rehearsal with Charlotte Sweetie, suddenly was incapacitated with a fever and the chills. And we actually rehearsed at the Algonquin, and he had to go to one of the rooms because he was so incapacitated and unnerved by it, but he got it under control. But that was before we knew what it was. And he happened to die on December 1st, 1986. So I always remember him on AIDS Day. And the third person was Bill Tynes, who was the founder of the New Amsterdam Theatre Company, which was the predecessor of all the nonprofit organizations that do classic and lesser-known musicals and concert. It was the acknowledged predecessor to the Encores series, and he lived to do that. And the show and the organization was really taking off. And then he got sick, and it was just a terrible time in the community. When Ed died, some people called him Ed Stone, Edward Stone, Eddie Stone. I called him often, and I cried for a year when he passed away. It was such a blow, creatively, emotionally, and I still cry when I think of him, and I still feel like his spirit is in my work.
Wow, of course it is, and I'm thrilled that you came on today. I want to bring on our last guest, but certainly not the least, and that's my dear friend Therese Lee, Bistro Award winner this year for her incredible show about her work as an interviewer on the red carpet. She is an amazing talent, and you wanted to talk about your friend Calvin, and I also have a photograph here of you and Calvin together. What are your earliest memories, Therese, of first hearing about this within our communities?
It just seems like all of a sudden it was there and it was everywhere. And I suspect, I worked with Calvin at the UCLA Department of Italian. That's how I met him. I was his supervisor, and there were just two of us on the staff. So it was just, and his friends, one by one, by the time he was towards the end of his life, all his friends had died. And a lot of people, and I was involved in the musical theater community here in Los Angeles, and a lot of people I knew were getting sick and dying, or you would hear about people getting sick and dying. I feared so much that Calvin was sick, and he was. And there was another friend of mine he was my orientation counselor when I went to UCLA. He showed us around, and then I re-met him when I was singing in a church choir in Westwood, and and he got sick too, and he died in December, and then 6 weeks later Calvin died, and it was just it was a really hard time. I also want to say that with Calvin, it was one of the biggest privileges of my life to walk that path with him, because he and I had nothing, there was no time to waste, and we just loved each other, and we made sure that we knew it. And I'm not saying that this was easy, but like, he really needed to talk about what he wanted for his funeral. And so we sat down and talked about it, because nobody wanted to talk to him about it. And so, and he just, I learned a lot about how important it is to just show up, and and be there when someone's in that place and not force that. I remember one time we were having lunch and he was 90 pounds thinner than that picture when he died. And there was a time when we were out to lunch and he was picking something up and he was trying to pour some water and he couldn't pour it. And I reached over to do it for him. And he gave me this look like, don't you dare. And I realized like I had to let him he had no T cells and decided he was going to Europe, and like he took his life, but he was going, he just wanted, and my life in that time was about T cell counts and singing at AIDS hospices and doing the AIDS walk. And I have to say, when Calvin died, it all stopped. It was like, I thought if I worked hard enough, I could save him, and I couldn't, and it was just a few months later that the cocktail, came and people were living. But, at that time, there was no hope. It was just sort of, so it was like this really horrible and yet this really beautiful time, because you just knew every moment was precious, So
Thanks for saying that, because I feel the same way. I mean, what was so unusual about this time, again, for those who may not have been around when this was all happening, we didn't have social media at that time. So a lot of times you wouldn't hear that someone had passed on until you were out in an event or something, and you'd say, where is Christopher? Or where is this person? And they would say, well, didn't you hear they passed away? And to me, this whole period also was such a blur because of all the memorials that we were going to. And
I remember that.
Go ahead. And
I remember that.
Have anything to add? Just jump in.
Well, I remember that People magazine came out with an article early on in the epidemic with pictures of those who had passed on, and I found someone who was my best friend when I was 12 at camp. I found somebody else I worked on my first show with, and it was shocking. It was just shocking.
Madonna, I want to ask you, I mean, obviously it touched you on such a personal level with your brother. But, that and the time frame, how do you feel that shaped your life moving forward?
It's like you just read my mind, Richard. I was just thinking that time did shape my life. It completely, I don't know if it shifted it, but it enhanced where I might have been going. Because through this, you also create more art and you create more connections. And I started doing more activism as well. I went to the AIDS quilt when it came around DC. I was living in DC at the time. I think it was in 1987 or 9. I don't remember exactly. There's the book. I actually have it behind me. And I volunteered I went to the quilt. There were about 2,000 panels there at the time. It was the first one. And then the very next time there were 20,000 panels or something. And then the next time there were 45,000. And so it just kept expanding. And this photo right here that Richard's showing is me with the mullet on the top right. This is in the book of the AIDS quilt. And the man with me there is Jimmy Isgro, who was my brother's first boyfriend. And we had just learned that Johnny was positive. And we had both just been weeping all day. And all of these people, like that experience of having a place to grieve together was incredible. It was heart-wrenching. I mean, and when you have as many artists as we were losing, and the people who love them, and who are also most were artists as well, it just becomes this spiritual place. So I started really being super active with the quilt. I volunteered at the next 2 displays. And then I did do AIDS Walk a number of times, and I'm also do AIDS Life Cycle. It turned me into a really avid activist for the cause and for my brother. I do everything in his memory and for his life. And I've ridden AIDS Life Cycle 6 times now from San Francisco to LA.
Wow.
I'm gonna be 70 fucking years old next year, and it'll be my 7th at 70. So, and I'm gonna do it.
My husband too is going to be 70 next year.
Me too.
Yay!
It's a big year.
Woo!
Here.
But it did spark that energy, and it just I always go back to that time, and everybody on here has said it. The love was extraordinary, and that really carries me through a lot of my brother's, the loss of him and that whole circle of friends. It was an entire, everybody we used to have dinners with were gone within a couple of years, honestly.
I mean, it's so difficult. I mean, we didn't walk around with our phones in those days. We didn't have them taking pictures of everything. But the Polaroids, I go back and I look at some of the Polaroids of the friends that are no longer around. There's a documentary up there, and Danny, my husband, and I were watching it one night, and we saw so many people in this documentary that were part of our lives together. And we've been together since 1990. So it was, to go through this. Ellen and Valerie, I want to ask both of you, because everyone else on the panel today are all from the world of show business. And we lost so many of our fellow artists. And I can't help but think the what if game. What if all these people were still around with the gifts that they were bringing to the world of theater? It was La Cage aux Folles that opened right in the midst of all this. And almost the entire chorus ended up dying of AIDS from the original Broadway company of La Cage. I want to ask both of you, we know what we were experiencing in the world of theater. What was it like within the medical profession, with so much not being known and you facing it day after day after day in a way that the rest of us were not experiencing it?
Well, I just want to say that there were some things that really strike my memory, and one of them was going to a funeral at the Salvation Army of a man who had died. Basically, he was homeless and he had had a substance use problem, and the Salvation Army had taken him in and gave him housing and helped him get to the end. And I'm sort of anti-religious, and so I always loathed going to any kind of religious thing. But I can remember the community of people from the Salvation Army, not necessarily the people who run it, but all the people who participated. And the things that they said about this guy. They thought he was a great guy, and he was a great guy. He was very interesting, very great personality, very strong personality. And I've been to so many funerals of people whose families could barely afford a funeral. And so many of them took places in churches, and it was not the way it was with our friends who were in show business or who were lucky enough to have enough money to have a good funeral. A good funeral, is there such a thing? But so many of them were so touching, and it made me think about death and grieving in a way that I had never been able to do up until then. I mean, when I started working with people with HIV, I was in my 20s. And, we forget how stupid we were back then. I was stupid. And so a lot of people around me were stupid too. But the feeling of personal loss happened a little bit later. My friend, I worked at briefly at a research place that was a grassroots research place called CRI, Community Research Initiative, and we were co-housed with ACTA in this kind of crappy building on 24th Street. And so I knew a lot of ACT UP people, and I knew a lot of the activists, and they became friends of mine. And a lot of people that Ellen worked with came to CRI, or they left us and went to work with Ellen. And nurses who would die, and it was heartbreaking. And so, as I try to do every World AIDS Day, I think of two people who I miss a lot: Joe Walsh and Jim Forrest. They were very much working for the cause, and they didn't make it. Jim Forrest was possibly the funniest person I ever met, and he was a nurse. Ellen could tell you more about him, but that's how it was for us. It was sort of the same thing, only maybe a little less glamorous.
Ellen, I have a two-part question that I want to ask you about. Those of us, and Therese mentioned it, Michael mentioned it as well. I remember being at the Monster in New York, which is a gay bar / piano bar, when the beginnings of what became Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, came in. And thank God they were educating people. They were telling people what was happening in the community, because we were not getting it on the news. All that we heard on the news was that there was a gay cancer. And if you were gay, chances are you were going to get this cancer. That's exactly how it was being presented to us. And there was so much that we didn't know, but these actors would go into the different piano bars, they would get up, Broadway stars would come in, sing a couple of songs, get everyone's attention, and then tell everyone what they needed to do in terms of protecting themselves. My two-part question to you is, number one, in the medical profession, were those of you in the profession becoming activists as well? I know that you were working very hard at what you were doing to save lives, but were you taking on that other mantle? And number two, what were your frustrations as far as the way this was being covered?
Well, for me personally, I was not involved in ACT UP, although I knew many of the members and still know. Gay men's health crisis, of course, was started back in the 80s, and they started to show up at hospitals looking for people who possibly had AIDS to support them. And back in, this is before HIPAA. Mm-hmm. So in any case, I felt that my for myself was better served on the inside, thus the name of the book, taking care of people, being the family for people who didn't have any or whose families abandoned them. Mm-hmm. And what I found so striking when I heard all of you talking is that you were there for your person or people that you lost to AIDS. But for every person that got supported, there was 10 that didn't, whose families would never come to visit them, would abandon them. Their belongings were thrown out. They couldn't get, we couldn't get funeral homes to bury them. We raised money. So in that way, that was the sense of my activism. As far as teaching and reaching out to the community, I mean, Valerie and I did that as part of our roles at St. Clair's and again at Lenox Hill, speaking to fire departments, EMS workers, other nurses. Again, there weren't such thing as you, Richard, who podcasting, where we could reach out to a broad community. We were talking to whoever would listen to us. We had pamphlets on the 9th Avenue Festival. We would hand out in front of St. Clair's. We would take blood pressures and we would hand out pamphlets about safer sex practices. We would hand out pamphlets about safe injection drug use practices. And then we would just be on the inside taking care of those who were unable, did not know about it and got sick before there was any chance to do anything about it. And so it's quite striking to be on my side of it, where, I was the only person sometimes holding somebody's hand who was dying. And I knew they had a mother, father, sister, brother, even husband, wife, and they were not there. And again, every World AIDS Day, I think about those special people that are written about in the book, because those are the people I think I do best. There were more, but I remembered their stories as if I was reliving them over and over. And that's why I'm so glad that Valerie and I did put out the book, because it just gives people something to think about, that these were lives that were cut short. These were lives that were unfinished. And like you said, who knows what a world it would have been with them still in it. And every year I feel honored, and I give thanks that I was able to be there and hopefully help somebody suffering be just a little less, because there was a lot of suffering.
Yes, there was.
Absolutely. And I can't thank you enough for your service and what you've done. Michael, I want to ask you, were you aware of what was happening as far as the crisis was concerned prior to it hitting home with you? Or was that when you first really became aware of it? Michael, can you hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry, you were talking to me
I was
specifically?
talking to you, yes. No, I said, were you aware of the crisis that was unfolding prior?
Oh yeah.
To it hitting home?
Gradually, I had gay friends who were telling me about this terrible experience that was overwhelming their community, and one by one, I did one show, and I think like 6 or 7 people from that show passed away. Including the wonderful Ray Gill, who created the part of the sun in Driving Miss Daisy. And these extraordinary people. I miss them so much when I'm doing a show, and there's someone I think is just perfect for one of my roles, and they're not here. But I did find comfort in this is kind of bizarre, but I as therapy, I kind of wrote a libretto about my friendship with Edward Stone, and my computer broke down in the middle of my writing that, and I took it to be repaired, and they said it might be gone forever, but the next week they told me that it was everything was restored, and as I was going to pick up the computer, a truck passed me with a license plate of someplace I'd never heard of before, Eddystone, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And I felt that he's with me.
Yeah.
There's the proof. What could I ask for?
Teresa, I want to ask you, I also, were you living in New York, or were you on the West Coast during that time frame? Because here in New York, we have a Hearts and Voices, and we went around to the hospitals and we sang, and it was a real life affirming situation. I remember going to one of the hospitals on Valentine's Day. I used to perform as Carol Channing. So I would show up as Carol Channing, and I remember they had these teddy bears for the patients, and they said that no one wanted to take the teddy bears into the rooms. And I remember going into the rooms and hugging these guys. I'm gonna tear up thinking about this. But what that experience was for you, because you were giving, but you were also getting back so much at the time.
Yeah, you mean, well, I was here in Los Angeles, and yeah, I do remember that, how everybody was afraid to touch, and someone with HIV, and I remember the people that I knew, I made sure to hug them, and it was just I don't even remember how I got involved with singing at the hospices. I knew someone who was an accompanist, and he was doing it, and so we would just go. I mean, it was just kind of like whatever came up, we would just go do. It just seemed all consuming to me, because it was. And the thing I've been thinking about is, you were joking about your husband turning 70, and there was a time when there were no gay men turning 70. Like there was a whole generation
That's right.
gay men that didn't get to turn 60 or 70 or 50.
To this day, when someone says, I don't like to talk about my age or something, I said, you should shout your age from the rooftops for every person who did not have that privilege.
Yeah. Yeah. My friend Calvin died when he was 37, and, I'm 61 now. He would have loved to be 61. He loved life so much. He held on to it until he couldn't hang on to it anymore. And I mean, I try to remember that. I've been gifted with a lot more years than he got, and I want to use them to the best of my ability in honor of him.
As I said before, tomorrow is actually World AIDS Day. Madonna, how would you like people to acknowledge and remember World AIDS Day tomorrow?
Wow. See, Richard, I told you I cry at the drop of a hat. So
well, look at me. I can't. I looked at those photographs of your brother, and it just got me. And I felt like a connection to him, even though I had never met him. So I thank you for sharing those.
Thank you. I think just remember those who left, those who are still here, and the kindness that we need to remember for those of us who are there, but also to share today. As a result of that, I'd love for people just to be kind to each other on this day tomorrow, well, every day, but in honor and in memory of all of those we've lost.
You talk about not knowing. Ed Stone did not let people know that he was sick. And I went to a benefit for Christopher Seppi, the lead from Charlotte Sweet. He was raising money because he needed it, and Ed Stone was there, and he came over to me, and we actually had a falling out. We went over to each other because Christopher, and we hugged each other so closely, like for 3 minutes, and I didn't realize then he was kind of telling me that this was goodbye, and it's just those memories, just are embedded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ellen and Valerie, how would you like people to acknowledge and remember World AIDS Day tomorrow and always?
I would like them to remember the people they knew who have died, and to honor their memory, whoever that person was. And I want people to be socially present and trying to be part of the solution to this illness. I do. I want them to be kind, as Madonna said, and I want them to be aware of what's going on. There are so many parallels in our world today where we could make a difference, and people choose to instead become polarized. And if it could be anything else, if it could be the way it was when we did all come together and we did all make a huge difference, I would like to have it be that again.
Thank you. Michael, same question.
Again, regardless of situation, it's so important to appreciate the people we know and to make the most of our time with them. You just don't know when what the future was for, and there are so many friendships that are you don't realize are so precious until you can't do much more about it.
Therese?
Yeah, I think also what I was like, it's people to be responsible for their behavior, to not get HIV in the first place, to honor those that were lost by behaving in a responsible way, in a way that's safe. That to me would be the greatest way that they could honor someone who passed away from AIDS.
Thank you for saying that, because there's so many of a new generation who were not there, who think that by taking the cocktail or the medication and everything, they can live with it. And it is a difficult thing to go through. I want to thank you all for being here today. This show today means a lot to me. And this is why I feel that what I do can make a difference, I hope. And the fact that we did take a pause today to think about this. I'm going to give each of you a chance to have your final word, as I always do. It could be about anything we spoke about today that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any final message that you want to leave everyone with today. I will pick someone when I finish, and then so on until the last person is standing. And then I've got a little film clip that I want to end with. I always, I was lucky enough to be at Carol Channing's memorial a few years ago. And Tyne Daly said, I will always think of her as being in the next room instead of no longer physically with us. And that resonated so deeply with me. And with everyone, I always think of those that I've loved and those that have loved me as being in the next room. And all of the names that have been mentioned on this show today, and all the names that were not mentioned, I'd like to think of them all as being in the next room, because they are. I end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. I'm going to say it again. Nurses on the Inside. It's an amazing book. Order 2 copies. Keep one for yourself and send one to a dear friend. And let them know in the inscription, you can write inside what they mean to you. By doing so, you're going to make an impact on their lives, and they will make an impact on your life as well. Pick up the phone, call someone you haven't spoken to in a while, because these moments that we have are precious. I have a dear friend, and he says, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different sized boats. And I always say, I don't care what size boat you're on, as long as you have a skipper by your side. And with that, I'm going to leave. And Madonna, I'm going to turn it over to you. And when you finish, you'll pick the next person. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here today. Please leave a comment on YouTube and share this with your friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just going to read a very brief little poem my brother wrote 2 years before he died. But he had already, I hope I can make it through it. It's very short, but we're alone in our lives. I don't know, before this time on earth and after. Singular, a spirit, meeting other spirits, and then glowing our own way, choosing our next destiny, to take on physical form, to join and love, grow and learn, and then return to our essence, which is truth, and the greatest, simplest energy of all, love. And I'm going to choose Michael.
Okay, my message is to honor history. It's upsetting for me to know that there's a kind of ignorance about a period that affected so many lives. And we have to learn from history. I mean, I'm feeling a little bit of the same depression I did then. I'm Jewish, and history is something to be lived, to be remembered, and honor the people who have been lost to history, and look out to make sure that whatever you can do to prevent occurrences of tragedy. Valerie?
I'm just going to say almost the same thing. Don't forget the past. Remember the lessons that we learned at such a cost, and try to remember to be kind and be present in the moment. And I'm going to leave it to Therese.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I am grateful to have this opportunity to remember Calvin Graves. He's been gone since 1995. It's a long time, but I will love him always. I was going to say till the day I die, but I think he was just one of those dear friends that I'll love forever and ever. And I'm grateful to have known him. And it was, no matter what happened, I'm grateful to have had that experience with him. And I just, I wish everyone would have a friend like Calvin. Ellen?
Thank you, Therese, and thank you, Richard, for hosting another wonderful remembrance of World AIDS Day. And I'd like to say that I am probably nearing more the end of my nursing career than starting it, and I am a nursing professor. And I just hope that in the years that I have left, and I hope it's years to be nursing, that I can impact the students that I teach to be the nurse that goes the extra distance in taking care of their patients with compassion and empathy. And if we can have a more compassionate and empathetic world, I think we will leave everything in a better place. So live your best life and pass on everything with honor and dignity. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, everybody.
When the HIV epidemic began, it seemed to be unstoppable.
But we've made dramatic advances since then. We know how to test for HIV, how to prevent people from becoming infected, and how to treat people who have the disease.
In fact, we've come so far that it's now possible to completely eliminate new HIV infections. And even more amazing, we can do it in 10 years.
To accomplish this goal, we need to do 3 things. First, we need everyone to get tested for HIV. You need to know your HIV status so you can make good decisions about your health. If you know you have HIV, you can take medicine to treat it. If you know you don't have HIV, you can take precautions to avoid getting it. If you're at high risk, you can take medicines to help prevent infection. If you share needles or have unsafe sex, you need to get retested often in case your status changes.
Second, we need to prevent new infections. If you're HIV negative, you need to keep it that way. Practice safer sex and don't share needles. If you have trouble doing these things consistently, ask your doctor about pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP. PrEP is a medicine that can reduce your risk of getting HIV even if you're exposed to it. It's available at the VA.
And third, we need to treat people who have HIV. If you're living with HIV, you need to take your medication. Medication keeps you healthy by reducing the amount of virus in your body, ideally to a level that's undetectable. If your viral load is so low that it's undetectable, then there's almost no chance you'll pass HIV to someone else. Make sure you take your HIV medicine every day, exactly as prescribed. Make sure you don't run out of your HIV medicine, and make sure you see your doctor regularly.
So that's it. Test, prevent, and treat.
We can do this.
But only if we do it together.
And that's why we're asking you to join us.
Because it's going to take every one of us to end HIV once and for all.